So just as a reminder, anyone who wants to post a question can do so in the chat box, but you're very welcome to just raise your hand and we can just have you unmuted if that suits better. And also, you're obviously both very welcome to ask questions to each other. So the conversation by no means stops here. So if there's anybody in the audience has anything ready, if not, I'll abuse my position as chair, because I had a few things noted down. Some of them are sort of disparate thoughts. And again, anyone feel free just to jump in. For Karen, I just wondered about what a common theme here was just isolation. And I find it interesting in the context of Ireland that radio, your first love is radio, is just more widely used still than in other kind of in our European neighbors. I'm not sure about statistics beyond that. But I thought in the context of the pandemic, can you see any scope for kind of a return to radio kind of across the board? Because it's a very curious kind of medium, isn't it? Like it has this odd mixture of distance and closeness, because you bring this kind of device into possibly a very intimate space. And I wondered if you just had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do actually, because radio, 80% of the people in Ireland listen to the radio every day, which is mad. Like that is a mad statistic in any country, that 80, but I think it's culturally, we grew up with people, well, you're too young, Tom, but I grew up with Gay Byrne, but you might have grown up with somebody like Brian Tuberty or whoever it is, that it's a natural thing in the morning that you turn on the radio for company. And it's been that, and I attribute it, rightly or wrongly, to people like Marion Finucane or Gay Byrne or Larry Gogan, or people who just were literally household names who joined us every day. And it was back in the days of my mother's time, when the man went out to work and the woman stayed at home, because we had a marriage bar. I don't know how it was in New Zealand, Octavia, but for my mother, when she got married, she worked in the civil service in the 1950s, and she was told at the day after she got married, you've no job anymore, and now your job is you're a homemaker, which was fine for her. She had 5 kids and she actually happened to like her job. But it wasn't very fine for people who didn't actually A, have children, or B, like the whole thing that they were sent home when they'd no job anymore. So this was this whole thing, you know, in Ireland, do you actually get married? Or do you say, as what they called a career woman, which was a term, are you married or a career woman? So, you know, and I had an aunt who was a career woman who never had any children, and she would have loved them, but she liked her job more. But, you know, the only exception was teachers. I think maybe nurses, but I know for sure teachers were allowed to continue to work. But anyway, so people like my mother grew up with people like Gay Byrne in the kitchen in the morning time, and they had kind of radio as part and parcel. And also we were quite an impoverished nation. We didn't have television for a very long time. I remember actually getting a television. It was the late 60s, I think, was around the time of the moon landing. My dad he just wanted to have a telly for the moon landing, and that was how we got it. So, but radio, that was an important part of my life. So I'm not sure about the statistics for the rest of the world, Tom, to answer your question, but what I do know is that the listenership in Ireland has held, you know, that 80% has held, and I think more people are engaged with not just with the station that I contribute to is Near FM, but I also contribute to what's called the LLARC group in the UK. It's the Later Life Audio Radio Cooperation. Our series has been picked up by Radio Tyneside, and also East London are looking at it as well, because it's for older people who want to still create. It's a medium as well, I think, for older people who maybe it's a reaction against kind of social media as such. I know podcasts, you get them on social media, but it's where it is something that's still known to them. And in all this world where we've been dragged kind of kicking and screaming into Zoom and podcasts and, you know, TikTok and one of the guys actually I interviewed for FTD, he's Simon Murphy is his name. His mom has FTD. She got it in her late 30s. He's on TikTok, but he has 200,000 followers. Now that just blows my head. You know, that somebody is putting a post up there is seen by 200,000 people. And I go, holy moly, you know. So anyway, he has been a great advocate of dementia, and he uses his platform to tell the story. So Sahar, I see your hand is up there. Have you a question?
I do. Thank you so much, Karen. And actually, you're completely right. I've always been fascinated by radio listenership has sustained itself through the ages, no matter what other medium. I know we say that, you know, video killed the radio star, but I actually don't think that happened at all. But that was just an interesting thought that I was while you were speaking, I was thinking about it, because my partner works in radio as a broadcaster, and the amount of it's fascinating how much engagement there is with the work he does. But I actually had a question for Octavia, and I was wondering, so one of the things that we've been hearing in Ireland since the pandemic started is constant comparisons to New Zealand and how New Zealand handled the pandemic, and all these comparatives of, you know, well, we're also an island and they're also an island, and, you know, they were able to do it, we should have responded in the same way. And one of the things that kept coming out was about both in those people who were saying, well, we should have been like New Zealand, and those against were the isolationist aspect of where New Zealand is on the globe, and how it's easier for them to close off borders than it is for us. And it was an interesting thing, because while you were speaking, I was thinking about, you know, you were talking about your isolation and being in the middle of this place by yourself, and sort of the parallels to what the place that New Zealand occupies in the world, and whether or not it's easy to isolate or not. And I was just struck by that it's I think that's, maybe this is a ramble, but that in terms of how it seems easier to be isolatory when you're not the one doing it, almost, in a sense. And so New Zealand's isolation seemed like this utopia that was so possible, but we weren't the ones doing it. So it was just an interesting aspect that sort of come out throughout the last year and a half as well, for I think for individuals as well. But I just saw the mirroring of your experience with the national experience, so to say, just very intriguing. I don't know if there's anything you can add to that, because I did a white man thing. I did a comment instead of a question, but you know.
Well, I think a lot of the sort of valorization of the New Zealand experience was because we were seen as a white country. There were countries that did better than us. Vietnam did a lot better than us. I think Taiwan in the early stages did a lot better than us, but somehow we were the ones that got the attention, which neither seems fair nor just, really. But it's true that although, you know, there are lots of islands around the world that could have isolated in the same way that we did, I think in a way isolation is part of the New Zealand culture. I mean, we are raised on it. There's nothing explicit, but when you're as far away from the rest of the world as we are, it can't fail to have, you know, an effect. There's a phrase that's very common here, and it's used in Australia as well, the tyranny of distance. And when you live in, it's so difficult to compare with Europe, because in Europe you can get on a plane and in an hour you'll be in a different culture in a different country. For us it's 3 hours just to get to Australia, and you know, they're hardly with it. So our experience of isolation, it has been, I think, extremely idealized. Part of it is, oh, it's so easy, you know, no one goes there anyway. They've only got, you know, what, 2 or 3 international airports. And all that is true. But it was still, I think, I wonder sometimes if this idea that New Zealand is this sort of utopian place at the end of the world it's completely wrong, generally. I mean, not just on a pandemic level, we tend to be seen as this, you know, this ideal. There's a lot of, you know, science fiction stories when the world goes to hell. You know, you can run away to New Zealand and somehow civilization will, you know, at the end of the world, there's this place you can rebuild. And honestly, that's just bollocks. We've got our own problems and lots of them. Our housing is shit. It's not insulated. There isn't enough of it. Maori are overrepresented in every negative metric. We've got heaps of work to do there. But when it comes to pandemics specifically, I wonder if this idea of isolation and sort of this utopian response is not down to the isolation and that we cut the borders. It's that for that 6 weeks, and actually largely for the vast majority of last year, the entire country was very much, right, this has to be done, let's do it, not complain. One of the basic sort of fundamental principles of New Zealand sort of society culture is this idea of a fair go. It doesn't always get expressed as the way it should be. It certainly doesn't happen in our socioeconomic states, but there is an idea of fairness, I think. And during lockdown last year, it was difficult, but it was difficult for everyone. Everyone had to do it. There were very few people who stood up and said, you know, I don't want to do this, I shouldn't have to wear a mask. You can't take away my freedoms. That bullshit just didn't fly here. And I think that that perception of unity, unity in isolation has done more for this. New Zealand's done so well than the fact that we just shut our borders.
Thank you for that, Octavia. I still have a few more questions, but I won't abuse my chair position. You touched on a few of them, actually, but I'm just going to make space for Lisa here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just had a question for both speakers. It's kind of a personal question, but you know, I'm just thinking in light of some of the other discussions we've had at this conference in terms of mental health. And I was just wondering both of your attitudes and how you're maintaining positivity going forward. You know, we talked about some pretty heavy subject matter there, and Octavia, you're right, we're perhaps not at a post-apocalyptic stage in terms of the environment, but it's not a nice trajectory that we're heading on. You know, when I saw that headline about the Amazon emitting more CO2 than it's taking in during the week, you know. So is that your attitude going forward, even in thinking of advocacy and what steps to take? And the same for Karen. It's, you know, it's really heartwarming and inspiring hearing about the guests come on and about their own personal experiences. And I remember you speaking about your personal experience at the coffee morning last year, and it's nonetheless, it's very draining stuff and it's heavy stuff. So how do you maintain that positive attitude when you're dealing with both of these topics and subject matter?
Rage.
Let me write that down.
Spite and anger get me a long way. Pretty much, I mean, when I first started writing science fiction and fantasy, I was all over the place. I, you know, was experimenting with all sorts of things. I thought, you know, I'd write in the same way that most people did, fairy tale retellings, that sort of thing. But as I go on, pretty much the only thing I write now is eco-fiction, climate fiction, environmental fiction, because it is the issue of our times. It's the fundamental issue, isn't it? I mean, the IPCC gave us, what, 12 years, and we're not going to hit that target. I don't think there's much use being optimistic to say that we are. I'd like to think that we could be, but the realistic truth is, I think too many people are ignoring too much, and that's not going to happen. And the sad truth is that I also ignore things quite a lot. If someone came to me tomorrow and said, look, we want you to do an article on the Great Barrier Reef. Here's your plane ticket. We'll pay you to do it. I'd be off like a shot. I mean, I know how bad it would be. I know the results would be terrible. It would be hypocritical. I'd still do it. I would find a way to excuse it to myself. I would say, well, the plane emits a lot of carbon, but I don't have children. So maybe this can, you know, balance out what I'm not emitting. I think we all do that to far too great an extent. So my response is basically anger at everyone, including myself. And I find anger and spite quite motivating factors. And sadly, I also find them quite humorous factors, which helps, because you don't want to be angry all the time. You have to be able to laugh at your anger and use it. I think.
Yeah, I think you touched on something there, Octavia, that was going through my mind, was the whole thing of laughter. Statistically, children laugh 300 times a day. And we don't, which is mad, because we're just grown-up children, really, you know. And the whole thing of listening to Octavia and her take on everything, and the amount of times that I was smiling through as you were chatting there, Octavia, we need to learn to laugh as well, because when we laugh, there's endorphins there, we feel better. And I think that's part of what happened to us in lockdown, is we didn't get to meet our mates. We didn't get to go for a few pints. We didn't get to go and have, you know, a cup of coffee, which turned into a hilarious story that somebody started and never actually finished. You know, we never got the belly laughs because we were just sick looking at each other. We were in our own fault. Well, I know in my case, you know, there was 5 of us at home, and 3 of them were, 1 in school, 2 in college, trying to be on Zoom in college at home, you know, and my husband next door on Zoom in work, and me in GBHI on Zoom in my front room. And I'm thinking, you know, you can look at this 2 ways. One could be that GBHI was the biggest gift I think I've ever been given, a year in the Global Brain Health Institute, which is a fellowship where you can meet literally the most amazing people from around the world, and have this year. And in normal years, it would be either in Dublin or in San Francisco that you would hang out with these amazing people. And I can see Bernice on the call here as well today, who is a Brazilian geriatrician who is now, I've never met her, you know, except on Zoom. You know, and all these people who you should have this wonderful year to trade secrets and be at the coffee dock and at the water cooler and have all these conversations. We haven't had them. You know, for a couple of weeks, I was thinking, this is awful. But, you know, is there a way that we can all meet? Can we go to this, you know, island somewhere? Which is the least infected island? And I was actually Googling, you know, can we all go to Madeira and we just meet there and just chat? You know, and that just became ridiculous. But, you know, then you get over that, you know, because, and Octavia, anger gets you a little bit of the way because it gets you up off your bum and moving. And then you kind of say, okay, how are we going to sustain this? Because you can't be angry all the time.
Yeah.
And you can't be angry at a pandemic. You know, nobody actually did it, and the whole world, I mean, people are suffering more than others, but you know, nobody caused it, so there's no villain here. And so how do you get around it? Okay, so for me, how I get around it is storytelling. You know, and the whole thing of what attracted me most of all to Lewy body disease is Robin Williams, was such a comedian, such a funny guy, had this awful life in his own personal life, and he was so repulsed by his own life that he killed himself. And Kevin Quaid, who is behind me here, he tells the story quite openly as well, about there are days when his nightmares are so bad when he wakes up that he forgets that he's Kevin. He forgets he's a lovely wife and lovely kids and lovely grandchildren. He forgets all, you know, the affirmations and the daily list of, you know, I am grateful for. He says, oh, sod that. I actually just want to die. This disease is too bad. But it's his pain and the pain of Robin Williams and all these other people who live with Lewy body disease. They're saying, get out and tell the story of what it's like, what it's really like. It is dementia, yes it is, but it's not memories. My mom had Alzheimer's disease, so it's a totally different disease. My mom's disease was gentle, and she got it when she was in her 80s, and she lived to be 89 and a half. And, you know, and my sister set up the Forget-Me-Nots choir, and it was all very gentle and lovely, and stories and, you know, poetry and, you know, all the lovely nice things that go with it, lavender and, you know, all sensory gardens. And there's lots of lovely things that happen in the world of Alzheimer's. Frontotemporal, no, not the same. It's very aggressive. It's the front part of your brain. It's where people become very aggressive. They're not like themselves at all. And one of the things that I've learned in the GBHI is that, you know, there are so many talented people in the world that their one sole aim in life is to tell the story of brain health, not brain disease, because otherwise it'd be called the Global Brain Disease Institute, and it's not. So when you gather all these people in a room and they all have a positive focus on doing good, it can't but rub off on you. So for people like Bernice, Susanna, who is a climate change advocate, you know, everybody has something that they bring to the table that they want to talk about. Fumi from Nigeria is doing an arts project next week. You're all invited to it. It's in Lagos on Zoom. You know, I'm doing the Q&A. I really wish I was going to Lagos in real life, you know, and these are all the things that I'm hopeful at some point in the future. I've made all these friends from around the world that at some point when we get to travel again, if ever we get to travel again, that I can meet these people in real life. So Lisa, what keeps me motivated is that I know there are people in the world who are doing amazing things. And it's just, you know, opening our minds. You spoke as well about mental health. One of my guests on the radio. We had a show about anxiety and depression. And one of my guests, Barbara Brennan, who is the founder of Sea Change, now not C as in SEA change, C as in Sea Change. Because I was Googling CEA change and I couldn't find it. And she says, nah, C as in look, see. She said that she tried to kill herself almost every day from the age of 14 to about 21. And it was, if she actually didn't try it, she thought about it every day for years and years and years. Now, when you meet this woman, she's amazing. She's a good looking woman. She's articulate. She's gorgeous. She's a lot to say. And yet she thought, I actually need to get out of this world because I don't belong here. And she's just, it dawned on her at some point when she was about 21, that she was hospitalized several times, that people keep saving her. And she thought, well, if people keep saving me, there must be a reason why they keep saving me. And I don't know why, but that maybe isn't my job to wonder why that anymore. So she talked about mental health, and she said something really profound that hadn't dawned on me up till she said it. She says, we all have mental health all of the time. Like we all have brain health, we've heart health, we've physical health. Some people have better physical health than others, and some people have better mental health than others, but we all have it. So the day we start acknowledging that we all have mental health all of the time, she says, at least if I can get that statement out there, she says, I feel like I'm actually finally landing what I've been trying to say for years. And it's not that she has mental health or he doesn't have mental health. We all have it. So maybe if that's the parting gift that I give today, is that we all have mental health, we all have brain health, and we all have physical health. What we choose to do with it after that is we treat ourselves, you know, to nice food, some exercise, to social engagement. If we can't get out and meet people for a real cup of coffee, even what we're doing today, we're socially engaging. The other thing is be curious. You know, I'm curious about Octavia, and Octavia, I didn't quite catch your book, The Impossible Something Grief. What is that? I want to...
Resurrection of Grief.
Oh, got it. Okay, The Impossible Resurrection of Grief. Right. So now my brain is challenged, and there's a new thing that I'm going to read. You know, so I suppose, Lisa, a long-winded way to answer your question is, as long as we can keep curious, keep our brain active, keep our bodies active, and I suppose keep our hearts and our souls active as well. You know, we really need to be storytellers, and I suppose by being a storyteller, you're also a story listener. And I think that's why I love the radio so much. Is because I get to listen to stories and I get to earworm on all these amazing stories. So, and I just want to say, Tom and Alicia, thank you so much for inviting us here today. Wonderful to listen to you, Octavia, and, you know, and New Zealand, you've given me another twist on it, because, you know, I have a husband who keeps saying, look at New Zealand, and I kind of go, I got to go into him and say, it's not totally perfect. We're not too bad ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on what you're saying about curiosity, because I think if you have that, you can weather most other things. There's a lot of humour to be found in curiosity. When I was saying that my I'm not dead emails consisted of terrible animal facts, there is an amazing amount of humour in nature and science. During lockdown, I was reading an article about some scientists who were obviously working on a budget, because you'll figure this out in a minute because I'll tell you why, and they were looking to analyze, you know, compounds in sea anemones. And so they took these anemones, and when they died, they basically blitzed them so they could more easily figure out the compounds inside. And they gave the name of what they blitzed it in. And I enjoy cooking quite a lot. And I read this paper and I stood up and I thought, that's a blender. I know that blender. And they've clearly gone to the kitchen aisle of the local, you know, department store and bought a blender to, you know, whiz up their sea anemones, because, you know, scientific equipment is expensive and you can get, you know, probably a whole lot better in the kitchen aisle at Walmart. And it reminded me of, you know, when I was doing seagrass experiments, I had to dig up hundreds of lots of sediment. And I just went down to the local, you know, warehouse, which is the New Zealand equivalent, I suppose, of Walmart or whatever it is you have over in Ireland. And I got one of these fancy icing kits, you know, when you're icing a cake, and it had one of these big syringe things. And I took the syringe and I just shoved it all along the beach. And I think if you're curious, you can find, for me, it's in the natural world, but everyone has their interests. If you're curious, you can find funny things, amusing things, wonderful things everywhere. I mean, have you all got a minute to hear about the fish scale gecko of Madagascar? which is my very favorite animal lately. It's only been recently discovered. If you know geckos at all, you know that sometimes if your cat catches them in the garden, they drop their tail and sort of skitter off. Yeah. The fish-scaled gecko does not lose its tail. It sloughs its entire skin, all of it, and then looking like a raw chicken breast, which you can see its heart, you know, palpitating through this raw chicken breast, it skitters off up into the trees and regrows its skin. And if you see a picture of this naked, skinless gecko, it's the most revolting thing you've ever seen, and it's so wonderful.
What's your next book, Octavia? Mad Animal Facts. You could just go back on all your emails for the last year.
I could. They got some really revolting ones.
Well, thank you both so much for, we've kicked off a whopping conversation, as I knew we would. I know we're running a little bit early, obviously, because of that kind of 20-minute gap of Amelia's presentation. But I think just conscious of, you know, people probably needing their Zoom breaks, we've going to be taking that very seriously in this conference, planning in all of our breaks. But just to flag up what's coming up next. So in about an hour and 15 minutes, just underneath, just under that, we have our final keynote, which will be chaired by Alicia here. And it's with the award-winning novelist, Neve Campbell, who's recently released a novel, This Happy. And then we'll be following that up with a closing kind of roundtable open discussion, fairly informal, and we'll be giving space to anyone who wants to contribute, but that'll be opened by Katrina Leahy here. And that'll be kicking off at 5 o'clock. So thank you all for coming to this last panel. It was an absolute delight. I was really looking forward to it. And I think we have a nice long break now for either a late lunch or coffee and cake, wherever you are, or Octavia, my absolute respect for you for staying up for this long. I doubt it'll be coffee for you at 1 a.m. But thank you so much for joining us from what couldn't be further away. It's really given a new meaning to Out of Bounds kind of today.
Thank you so much for having me.
No,
Yes,
absolute pleasure.
And thanks for having me today as well. And thank you everybody for the questions today as well and for your interest.
Super, thank you. And I'll see anyone who's coming to the keynote at 4 o'clock then. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you all so much.